Nobody knows even why some houses are called haunted.
What would you call this place?
Well, diseased, sick, crazy. Such houses are described in the Bible as leprous. Before that, in Homer's race for the underworld, the house of Hades.
Hello everybody, this is Irene from the Paranormal UK radio show, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK radio network. Jack Roth from J3 Films. He's an author, he's a researcher, and he's a producer. Because he's now at the moment doing a documentary, aren't you, Jack?
We are, yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Do you want to have a quick word and just quickly say what your documentary is called?
Yeah, so our second documentary, it's part of a trilogy, and it's called Extraordinary: The Seeding, and it's going to be coming out on online streaming services on September 3rd. So it will be available on Amazon and iTunes and other streaming digital streaming services. And after that, we'll see where else it winds up. Our first documentary ended up on Netflix, so we're kind of hoping the same thing happens with this one. And it's all part of a trilogy. And we actually just finished shooting the third one. Just got back.
Cool.
That's very good. So you keep a look. Listen, people, watch out for that because I'll be advertising it. So watch out on the network and you'll see it come up when it comes nearer the time. But today we're going to be talking to Jack about Ghost Soldiers of Gettysburg. Now, I'm not too up on this, Jack, because, you know, we didn't do Gettysburg when I was at school 100 years ago. All we did was things like British Kings, Queens, the battles over here and one thing or another. But very, very little about America. So
you have a lot more history than we do.
Yeah, I know. We've got a lot to get through, yeah. And you know, so what I've been told recently is, and it's such a shame because now apparently, I don't know whether I'm right with this, people, but apparently the children in the schools today, they don't learn about the kings and queens of old and things like we did.
No.
They learn about the wars, World War One, World War Two.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's such a shame because they're missing out on all that beautiful history of this country. But Gettysburg, now Gettysburg was a big part in your history over there, Jack, wasn't it?
It was huge. Our history for this country, at least, the United States, goes back 240-something years at this point. But in the United States, when people talk about our history, a lot of times people talk about before the Civil War and then after the Civil War, because it was such a huge event. Mm-hmm. And within the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg was the pivotal point in that as well. So within the Civil War, it was before Gettysburg and after Gettysburg. So it was a very significant event in our history. If things would have gone the other way in the battle and the Union, the Northern forces wouldn't have won the battle and the South would have won that battle, we probably would have, the United States would look a lot different than it does today.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. At that point, Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia went north into Northern Territory, and if they could win, they were winning a lot of battles up to that point. They were really kind of dominating the war. And it was superior leadership and superior tactics, and it wasn't until Gettysburg where the tide changed. Their goal was to go up in the Northern Territory, and if they won a battle up there, because the Northerners were getting the people in the North were getting so sick of the war, so many people were dying. It was horrible from that standpoint because the armies were using Napoleonic tactics, but the technology and the weapons was more advanced. So it was really slaughter. It was, they would line up, march, and then they would, get absolutely decimated by cannon fire.
Yeah.
And volleys of muskets. So it was horrible. It was, and remember, the population back then wasn't what it is today. Obviously, it was much less. So no family in the country at that point went unscathed as far as having a son or a husband or a brother who wasn't killed or injured in that war.
Yeah. So there was actually thousands of people killed, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was the first. It was 3 days, early July, 1863. 3 days of battle, and there were over 61,000 casualties. Now that for 3 days is an awful lot. And
that is a lot.
Yes, and that includes injured, dead and wounded and missing. They never found a lot of bodies, and I'm sure some of the soldiers actually went AWOL and never came back. It was an absolute, it was horrific.
It was a massacre.
It was on both sides. It really was. A lot of very young men from both sides died in that battle. So, and then when you take something like that happens, and in England, you guys have the same thing. You have a ton of battlefields in England.
Oh, yeah, we've got loads.
Right, and loads. And it's the same thing. That energy is imprinted on the environment.
That's right, yeah.
And it stays there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you go to Culloden, the amount of people that have gone to Culloden, and they say that they've heard the bagpipes, they've heard the soldiers marching, they've heard horses. And it's the same thing out there, isn't it?
It is. We don't have...
Sorry.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask how big that actual battlefield is out there. How many acres or miles is it?
Well, there's a small town of Gettysburg, and then the battlefield kind of surrounds it. And on each day, the battle was taking place. The main parts of the battle were taking place at different areas in that location.
Yeah.
So the first day, it actually took place in the small town. A lot of the action took place outside and leading into it. And then on the next 2 days, there were different areas. Like every battle has the names of different little skirmishes or whatnot. In Gettysburg, it's places like Devil's Den, Little Round Top, Pickett's Charge. There's all these little areas where intense fighting took place.
Yeah.
And so, and what's great, I will say this, the National Park Service has always been, Gettysburg is one of the best places to go to really get a sense of what the battle must have been like. And what I mean by that is sometimes in battles, there are towns built up over it. I mean, you can barely know there was a battle there. But with Gettysburg, they kept the landscape as pretty much as it was. And not only that, over the years, trees, obviously over the course of 100, 140 years, trees keep growing. So areas become more and more lush with trees. Well, they actually cut back the trees. They cut down trees to keep it so that it looked like it did in 1863.
Oh.
So if you were to do your homework before you went to visit the battlefield, and you said, okay, first day, here's Devil's Den. This is what happened. This unit did this. They charged. They attacked. And then you went to Gettysburg. You could stand there and be like, wow, you could see it all in your mind because it's so easy you can see where they charged up that hill or down that hill. So it's very emotional. It's an emotional place to visit.
Oh, I'm going to go there. I definitely will go there.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
I really do. For anyone who's ever... Yep.
It's on my list. It's definitely on my list.
Good.
Right, so like I said, you've got the atmosphere of Culloden and Bannockburn, whatever. There's two different battles, by the way. Bannockburn was years before Culloden, but you've got that atmosphere there that people still pick up on, and very, very paranormal events going on, occurrences and everything. And this happens there at Gettysburg too.
It does. Gettysburg gets about 1 million visitors a year.
1 million.
And yeah, so and the idea for this, well, if I can give you a little bit of a backstory, if that's okay, it'll lead up to the why this book exists.
Mm-hmm.
I had been, for a while, researching the paranormals. I had had some interesting experiences myself, and that kind of led me down this rabbit hole of what's a ghost, what is a haunting, what exactly is paranormal activity. So as a journalist, naturally, my inclination was to research. But I also wanted to experience. And so what I started doing was I started going to Gettysburg, and then I also started taking groups of people to Gettysburg on weekend events. And it was not something I did full time. It would be something maybe I did 4 times a year. But we would plan it, and we would set up a whole weekend, including restaurants, eating, some tours, but we'd also do investigations. We'd also go to certain different points of the battlefield and have equipment with us, obviously cameras, recording devices, different things that people would bring to something like that. And we supplied some of that as well. And then we documented everything that happened. So the people who went on these trips, we would spend the weekend at a haunted bed and breakfast, which was usually a house that was on the battlefield, and that during the battle was pretty much all the houses were used as field hospitals. So if there was a house in Gettysburg in 1863, odds are it was used as a field hospital. There were injured and dying soldiers in that house. So there were, and those homes as well also absorb that energy. So they're haunted. They're all haunted. Everyone has stories upon stories of people who stay there and either hear things, see things, etc. So we would set these events up, and I've been doing this for a couple of years and learning and growing from, because of what I personally, but also doing these events to help other people kind of, because I had trained with a parapsychologist, a PhD here in Florida, and he taught me a lot. He taught me about how to do proper investigations, what to look for, how to properly document things, and not to jump to conclusions, etc. And so I wanted to share that information and knowledge with other people. So when they went on these things, I would actually do like an hour lecture on what is a ghost. That's exactly what it was called. What is a ghost? And I would ask people, okay, what is a ghost? So, Irene, if I ask you right now, what is a ghost? Give me your definition of what you think a ghost is.
My definition is like a reenactment, a replaying of someone's life or something.
Right, like a moment in time.
Yeah, a moment in time, yeah.
So that would be known as a residual haunting. Now, there are different types of hauntings and that people experience. The residual is a big part of it, and I think
I think what people call spirits is something totally different.
Well, that's a different type of experience, correct?
Yeah.
So, because when people experience, that's called a genuine haunting, and when people experience a genuine haunting, there's some type of communication involved. There's an acknowledgement that you're there, or they're there, or there's a fragment of consciousness that still exists, so that there's recognition.
Yeah.
With the residual haunting, you might just hear bagpipes, or you just might hear gunfire, or you just might hear men yelling, and that's a replay of it.
Yeah.
So that's different. So we would try to teach people all these things, and then have them go out and experience.
Yeah.
And over the course of 7 years, I had a lot of information. I had a lot of documentation. I had my own experiences there, and I had a lot of other people's experiences that I had documented. And then I had met another gentleman who was also doing kind of the same thing, but he was approaching it more from he was ex-military, and he was like a historian. I mean, he knew exactly what generals were in what spot and what colonels were doing certain things on that battlefield during a certain time.
Yeah.
So from a historic perspective, he was like an encyclopedia. So I met him, and we're like, you know what? Together, we can put together a really interesting book, a unique book that's really never been done before. Because we're going to tell stories, but it's not just going to be folklore. It's going to be from firsthand accounts. Mm-hmm. And what we also wanted to do with the book is we have chapters in there that are just based. One's about quantum physics. One chapter's on the concept of quantum physics and how that may or may not tie into ghostly phenomena. We interviewed PhDs. We interviewed several parapsychologists and people who were in those particular fields, because we wanted to throw in theories as to what you might be experiencing.
Yeah.
So you have the stories, and then you have the science, and then you also have the psychic, because we would always try to bring an intuitive with us every time we went.
Yeah, well, you've got to look at it from all angles, haven't you?
You have to. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You're talking about phantom hospitals. There was a story I read this afternoon about a phantom surgery. And that was a fella in this house, and he went down to the storage room. I don't know whether you know this story, do you? I expect you do.
Yes.
And it was at the Pennsylvania Hall in Gettysburg College. And he opened the door, and there it was. It was like an operating theatre. There was people dying. There was blood everywhere. There was people being treated, but there was no sound coming from there.
Right. And he was shocked. And also, because people were having their limbs amputated, which was in the Civil War, that's what they did.
Yeah.
If you were shot in the arm and the leg, they just cut it off.
Yeah.
So a lot of people actually died from the actually being shot, but it was the infection that happened after. So, and obviously after that, once the early 1900s came around, they had penicillin, but they didn't during the Civil War. So it was a horror show, yeah. And imagine this guy, modern day, going down an elevator. It opens in the basement, and he sees this.
Yeah. Oh, crumbs. I don't mind seeing ghosts. I don't mind that in any form, but I don't like blood. I don't like blood. I wouldn't want to see somebody's arm or leg laying there,
Yeah.
So it must have been quite a shock to him, actually. Poor fella. Never mind. But, when I read that, I thought, oh, my God. But, like you're saying, they used houses for these hospitals, everything. It wasn't just this one particular building, was it? It was other places as well.
Here's something that's fascinating that people don't realize. In 1863, in early July 1863, there were maybe 5,000 people who lived in Gettysburg.
It's quite a lot.
5,000 people, but in the course of the next 3 days, almost 200,000 soldiers invaded their town.
God, how'd you feed them?
Both armies. Well, they were doing their own foraging. They do whatever they do. But here's the thing that people don't realize, and there have been books written about this. It's the aftermath. So here you are. The battle ends on July 4th. The They retreat. The Confederates retreat. The Union Army stays. They're burying their dead. They're making mass graves for the Confederate soldiers.
Yeah.
There are hundreds and thousands of dead horses, dead men, tens of thousands of wounded men, and they all set up in field hospitals in and around Gettysburg. The town was obviously overwhelmed with what was happening. And it is said that months later, even months after the battle, you can still smell death. You can still smell the rotting bodies and horses. You can only imagine what it was like for these civilians who lived in Gettysburg when all of a sudden these two armies, and it wasn't planned. The two armies, it was an accident. Gettysburg was an accident. They weren't supposed to fight there.
Well, it wasn't then. They hadn't planned any of this.
They were, but the armies kind of, what happened was there were some Confederate soldiers that went into the town of Gettysburg to get some shoes, because during the Civil War, shoes was a big thing. There were, especially in the Confederate Army, a lot of them didn't even have shoes. They walked barefoot. And they marched 20 miles a day, often more than that, in bare feet. You can only imagine what that was like. So in any chance they had to get shoes, they would try to find shoes. Yeah. And so they went into the town of Gettysburg, and that's where some Union scouts ran into them. There was a little skirmish. Robert E. Lee didn't want to fight at Gettysburg, and some of his generals, in particular General Longstreet, definitely didn't want to fight there because the ground wasn't good for them. And the Union Army was a little delayed in getting there. That's why on the first day the Confederates overran the town there were some Union troops in Gettysburg. Yeah. But all the Confederate forces came in on that first day and overwhelmed them, and it wasn't until later that day that all the other Union forces arrived. So it's a really interesting story about how that battle could have easily been fought somewhere else. Yeah. So it's an interesting lead up to how it all happened.
Yeah, it is interesting. So you obviously went to many of the places. What about Farnsworth House?
Oh, the Farnsworth House is fascinating.
Yeah.
What's really cool about the Farnsworth House, it's a brick building and has a brick base, and there are still tons of bullet holes in that brick face. Yeah. So from the shelling and all the gunshots, because there were snipers after the first day's battle in the city. There were snipers on both sides trying to shoot each other, and the Confederates at that point were in the city, and the Union were right outside the city, and the snipers were trying to pick each other off. So all of these, the Farnsworth House is one of them. It's a restaurant now. And it's also a bed and breakfast. Yeah. And of course it has its ghost stories, and, what people see, and hear and smell. It's all the senses when it comes to hauntings. And it's a fascinating old building. But when you see the actual, chips of the brick are just chipped off either through, a shell hitting it or partially hitting it, or the bullets hitting it or what have you. So it's a really interesting place.
Yeah, because there's like you say, there's a lot of things go on in there, and there's a soldier in the attic that plays the Jew's harp. Yes. Yes, people they've heard that. Time to time they hear that. Yeah, is that one of those things you put in your mouth and go twang, twang, twang?
Yeah, no one really plays it anymore, but back then.
I had one.
You did?
Ago. Yeah, I lost it.
That's one of those, 1860s popular kind of instruments.
Oh, I wish I'd known where it was now. Oh.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I wasn't very good on it. I twanged a bit, but that was...
Well, the big thing back then was Fife and Drum, which is basically flute and drum. And a lot of people hear that. Either on the battlefield or in town, and all of a sudden they'll hear it. And a lot of people sometimes they think it's a reenactment, because reenactors do reenactments there, and they do have And sometimes they'll have weekends where they reenact something and they'll stay there. They'll actually spend the night there. Well, guess the whole weekend in tents, because they camp out exactly like they did in 1863. They're in uniform. They eat like they ate. They cook like they cooked. Their bedding is exactly the way their bedding was. The tents are made of the same cloth that there was in 1863. So they're trying to be as accurate as they can. But guess what? We spoke to a lot of those reenactors, and they have a ton of paranormal experiences.
Yeah.
Because they're on the battlefield all day and night. Mm-hmm. They're there at night whenever all the visitors are gone. And they draw some of that energy. Imagine if there are spirits, actual spirits of these soldiers on the battlefield, and they're seeing guys dressed up like they're in the battle.
Yeah.
So they're drawing that energy to them. And they had stories that it just blew us away. They would see other soldiers, and then they always, whenever someone actually sees an apparition at Gettysburg, it's really interesting the way they describe them, because they always describe them as really, really skinny, like skin and bones.
No, they must be
haggard,
malnourished.
Definitely malnourished.
Yeah.
And with the Confederates, it's like, no shoes. Their pants are all ripped.
Yeah.
Their hats are in disarray. Their faces are all, they're filthy. And they're just walking very solemnly. And again, if it's a residual haunting, they're seeing what it was like all these years ago, over 100, how many years ago, of these. It's the 150th anniversary, what was recent. But it's amazing to think that you can actually, it's like going back in a time machine for a couple of seconds.
Yeah. It's amazing.
And so, we had, and it's funny, Irene, you talk about all these stories about Farnsworth House and all these stories that are the more well-known ghost stories of Gettysburg. Mm-hmm. But the book is filled with, all the stories in the book are filled with our own stories. So it was based on either our experiences or the people we were with. Okay, so tell me some of the things that you actually experienced. Well, okay. A lot. That's going. Well, I'll start with some of the more common things, and then I'll tell you a really interesting story. All right. What winds up happening is, let's say you're out there with 11, 12, 15 people, and you're on the battlefield, and you're walking around, and people have cameras, they have tape recorders, they have tri-field meters, they're trying to get readings, they're trying to figure out if there's high electromagnetic fields, what have you. And then there's a psychic out there and a lot of times psychics are overwhelmed because so much happened. It's not like they're just going into a house where a person may have died. They're going into an area in a location where there were 61,000 casualties and so much suffering and pain that if you're an intuitive and you're an empath, you're picking up on all of it at once. Yeah. And if you don't know how to control that, you are going to be overwhelmed and not be able to go there. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty wild. So, and then what winds up happening is you have people, normal people, and it could be a couple where the girlfriend drags the boyfriend because she's really interested in ghosts and hauntings, and he's just going because he's trying to be a good boyfriend. Yeah. And he's the skeptic, right? Keep the peace, yeah. Exactly. What inevitably happens every time is that guy has the experience. Oh. And it freaks him out, and he's never the same. So that changed man more than once. Exactly right. But I'll tell you an interesting story, and this is just one of many. One night there's a location on the battlefield. It's called a triangular field. Yeah. And if people were to look that up, they would immediately find it. It was a pretty hefty little area of conflict, of battle, and they went, there were a good number of casualties. when what had happened was the Confederate forces came up through, was a sloped hill, and it was literally a triangular-shaped field. Mm-hmm. They came up through that on the second day of the battle, and the Union soldiers who were in Devil's Den bombarded them with artillery, and they had snipers, and eventually, though, they made it through the triangular field, and the Confederates overtook Devil's Den. But that was during the course of the entire day. But there were many casualties there. And we had taken some photos that literally showed at the bottom of the field, soldiers, men in Union uniforms. And they were not there when the photos were taken. There was no one in the field.
They came out on the photograph. They
came out on the photograph.
But you didn't see them with your own eyes?
No, didn't see it. And what happened was one of the psychics was there with us, and she kept walking towards this one area, and she's like, take photos there. Take photos of that area. So some of the people with us took photos, and these images came out. And you can see they're far away, but you can see the lighter Union color, light blue pants, darker blue tops.
Yeah.
A lot of the kepi, the hats they used to wear. And there they were. So we always had a strong interest in the triangular field because we had a lot of experiences there. There was a lot of activity.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy I wrote the book with, Patrick Burke, he actually took infrared video footage. And there was one of the people he was with was walking. And all of a sudden you saw this soldier come out. Remember, it's infrared, so he's kind of in a white, it's white form. Comes out and runs and jumps over where the fence was during the battle. And you can actually see his foot.
Obviously, the fence isn't there anymore, but right. Where there was a fence at the particular time.
Exactly right. Where a stone wall, it might have been a stone wall that was there during the battle. And this soldier comes right through, jumps right over. And the guy who was also right there next to him in the video footage had no clue, didn't see a thing. And it's that kind of stuff that happens all the time there.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, I'll get to the story. So we had set up a camera overnight in the triangular field. We put it under a rock so it was safe from rain, and then it showed part of the field. And so in the morning, we wanted to get there real early to get the camera before visitors started showing up so someone would take the camera.
Yeah.
So it was about 6 o'clock in the morning. We show up, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. No one's there. No one. It's a rainy, misty day. You can imagine this. And
I am imagining it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I go, the guy I'm with, it's raining, so he doesn't want to get out of the car. He's like, all right, just go grab the camera. He was driving, so he's like, I'll just wait here, go down. I said, I'll go get the camera. So I go to this rock formation thing in the triangular field. There's some rocks there. I get the camera, and I start walking back up towards the car. Well, when I got to the area where there's a fence that leads into the triangular field, so I'm just leaving the field, all of a sudden, and it's really hard to describe this, everything changed around me, and the atmosphere kind of changed.
Yeah.
And I'll try to explain this afterwards, but what happened was all of a sudden I started hearing yelling.
I know this feeling.
And I started to hear men. One of the things that during the Civil War is well known was called the Rebel Yell. And the Rebel Yell was the Confederates, when they charged, they would yip and yoop and screech and scream to scare the Union forces.
Yeah.
It's kind of a Native American thing, and they took that up, and they were known for the Rebel Yell. If you talk to Union soldiers who survived the war, they're like, oh, I still have nightmares about the Rebel Yell. So when they charged up Triangular Field that day, there would have been Rebel Yells.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, I'm thinking, because I'm trying to be a good journalist, I'm trying to be objective, and I'm hearing these yells, And at first I'm like, maybe it's a cow. Maybe it's a farm animal, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to, maybe it's a bunch of rabbits.
Trying to debunk it.
Trying to debunk it, trying to figure out what it could be. But it became very clear that it was men hollering. And it got closer and closer to me, but I couldn't see anything. And it lasted for about 30 seconds, and I'm standing there, just standing, like not moving at all at this point. Yeah. So it lasted for about 30 seconds, and then it stopped. And when it stopped, I kind of was like, oh, my God, what just happened? And the guy that was with me in the car is like, what's going on? Why are you taking so long? What are you doing? I'm like, look, I just heard something, and I'm telling you right now, we need to research something. So we went back, and we started there at the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg in the early 1900s. There's actually video footage of the old Confederate soldiers, all these veterans that came back to the battle and were there for a reunion, both sides. And one of the things that they did was the rebel guys, the old Confederate soldiers, did the rebel yell on camera.
Oh. And
when they did the rebel yell, they started hooting and hollering. And I'm like, oh, my God, that's what I heard.
Gosh. So, you've really got me now.
Well, for about 30 seconds, something connected in my brain where I was able to tap into one of those residual kinds of hauntings.
Yeah.
Where that replay of that event occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And it was obviously audio because I just heard it. I didn't see it. But I was, and the weird thing about it is that what happened to the atmosphere before it happened.
Change back.
Yeah, well, and I looked that up too because I researched everything, and I found out that there's something in paranormal and phenomena known as the Oz factor.
Yeah.
And the Oz factor is when something happens, and this happens with UFO abductions, alien abductions, other things like that. There's this strange, it's like things change, the atmosphere changes. It's like, okay, that's why they call it the Oz factor, because 1 minute you're in Kansas and the next it's color and you're in the Oz. You're somehow something's changing in your brain, in the atmosphere. There's a connection made that's making it feel different.
Yeah, and you can feel that when you have a sighting.
Right.
When I've had a sighting or anything, you can actually feel that what you're trying to explain. I can't explain it, but it is a change, like you say. It is a total change.
Yeah, it's hard to explain to people.
Yeah,
right?
it is. It is hard.
Yeah.
But when you experience it time and time again, then you do connect with it. You know that you felt it.
Right.
But you were lucky enough, you felt it on the first one. But see, even when I think about sightings now that I've had, I can feel it. I can feel that what I felt like at the time.
Right.
That emotion that I went through or felt at the time, What I was going to also say is, tell me, is it normal out there now? Do you have birds and animals on the battlefield? Is there singing of the birds and everything, or do they steer clear of this place?
No, I think at this point, there's certainly birds all over the place. It's actually, and here's the ironic thing about Gettysburg, it is absolutely one of the most beautiful and most peaceful places you'll ever visit. Because it's beautiful. It's beautiful landscape. The rolling hills of that part of Pennsylvania, it's all rolling hills. Yeah. And it's really, quite delightful to be there. And that's the thing that's so weird. Now, obviously the visual, it's calm and peaceful because they make sure it stays that way. But there are birds all over, like there's a lot of visitors. So it's not like you see a ton of deer around because at night you see deer, But during the day, there's so many visitors that no animals are going to really come out. But yeah, and it makes you think. Because it's so peaceful now, you think about how horrible it must have been for these soldiers, for these young boys. And the Civil War, like any war, it's always young men for the most part. I mean, there were older officers who got killed during the battle, but you're talking about an enlisted person in the Civil War. I think the average age was 18.
Yeah.
So you have, and then you had kids who wanted to join. They're 16 and 17.
Little drummer boys and things.
Yeah, and then the little drummer boys were very young, and they died. They got killed.
Yeah. Yes, so sad. Did you want to say something? Sorry, did you want to say something, Christian?
Well, one thing I know about Pennsylvania is that it was founded by an English guy, wasn't it? It was founded by a guy called William Penn.
William Penn.
Yeah.
Who was known for two things. He was known for being an aristocratic merchant, very successful merchant, who had very strong beliefs, unusually for that time period, in equality. And he founded particularly Pennsylvania on the idea of religious freedom. The irony of that, because of course the Civil War, and also, just to finish off on that, he also it's a double-edged sword in a way, because he was also not only a person of conscience, he was also a person of equality. He was one of the first people to have great treaties with the local Indian tribes, the local Native American tribes, and very successful, which is very unusual. He also, very importantly, was a Quaker, who, of course, are pacifists. So He founded one of the first states in America.
So somebody that founded this actual place, Pennsylvania, this county, as we call them over here, state to you over there, I believe, was a peace-loving person, and yet on this very place that he founded, one of the worst battles in history took place.
The bloodiest American battle ever on American soil.
The irony of that's the reason, that's exactly the reason I brought it up. He'd have been turning in his grave. Because, of course, the last thing a Quaker wants is any physical violence. I mean, I've known real modern-day Quakers, and I can assure you, if they can avoid fighting, they'll find a way. They'd rather lose than fight.
Right.
Whereas, it was based on both sides were saying they were guided by God.
Right.
The irony of that.
Well, it was very religious. Everyone was very religious back then.
But the other thing I wanted to mention as well is, do you know there's a lot of ley lines that go through Pennsylvania? Probably more than... Apparently so, yeah. There's a lot of ley lines that go through Pennsylvania as a state.
And UFO sightings.
Absolutely.
Now, this is one of the reasons why I asked about the animals and the birds, because there's a lot of places where there has been really bad catastrophes like that, battles or whatever in this country, where hardly a bird sings.
After all these years still, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'll have to make note of that next time I go back.
I think animals can sense bad noise, bad sort of...
But we take birds for granted, don't we? We don't hear them unless you actually put in your consciousness out there to listen to a bird sing, and you just go about your own world, and that bird's singing away, and you don't even hear it. So I was just wondering. So next time you go out there, have a listen and see if there's many birds singing. I expect there are. I expect I'm wrong, but what did you find on the camera? Anything?
Oh, okay, nothing on that camera.
No?
But I did, one of the photos I sent you, was from the Gettysburg Battlefield, and it was right behind Devil's Den. There are a lot of trees. It's a forest area, and for some reason, I had my camera, and this was a film camera. It wasn't digital. This was back when it was film. So I had my Nikon, and I'm walking around, and I told everyone, just walk around, go to a quiet space, take pictures, do EVP sound experiments, try to ask questions, give time for answers, see what you get. And so those are the kinds of things we would do. But I said, find quiet space, go and explore. So I'm there, and I had been there obviously several times already, but something was telling me to go down Devil's Den into this wooded area. When I got there, it was real quiet, and I was just like, something, and again, intuitively told me, take pictures of the woods, just the woods. So I start snapping away. I take these pictures. Well, I get home after the trip, and I get the film developed, and I'm looking at it. I'm looking at all my pictures, and I see something in the background of these pictures I took in Devil's Den. And I close up. I did a couple close-ups, got closer, and you very clearly see an apparition, a form, what looks like a person in a dress with a long dress or skirt with a little bag, carrying a little bag. And it's all white, all in white.
White lady.
Well, and so I'm like, oh my God, what did we get here? So again, I'm like, let me put on my journalist hat. I start doing research, and I'm like, why would a woman be on the field dressed like that at Gettysburg? Now, there could be other hauntings there. I mean, there are Christian, is like you mentioned, a lot of Indian tribes lived there in the 1700s and earlier than that. So there's that part of it too. That's spiritual, and there's a lot of that going on there.
Well,
So
could it be someone from the town walking through the woods before that used to walk through the woods often, long before this battle ever took place, and still doing it?
It could have been, and that was one of the things I'm like, well, let me just look into it. But here's what I found out, and this is really cool. I can't confirm that this is obviously what's on the photo, but apparently after the battles during the day, it was the fighting, right?
Yeah.
Then at night, they all went back. The fighting stopped. So what you had was a lot of injured, dying men screaming and moaning on the field. So what would happen is the medical teams would go onto the field and try to do what they could, whether it was applying morphine just to numb the pain, or try to do what they could to whatever, save them. Most of the time they couldn't, or bring them back to the field hospitals. And they were allowed to do that because the fighting, it was kind of like a truce at night.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, so what would happen was, because there weren't very many, there were a lot of nurses there. So the nurses would, and there was a little satchel bag they would carry with them that had morphine and all these things in there, like bandages, morphine, things like that in it. And they would go around and try to tend to the wounded men.
Yeah.
So, and they would wear, back then, no one wore short skirts. Women weren't allowed to. They wore long dresses. So the dresses went down almost to their feet. So it looks like that, but I can't obviously tell for sure. But it could very well have been one of these nurses trying to administer some kind of relief to some of the wounded soldiers at night.
It could have been, and in some of the battles that have been over here, and I think the Napoleonic battles and one thing or another, families actually travelled with their husbands, the generals and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, there were women there. That's why there were women there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe the generals and the people that were in charge, maybe they had some of them had their families with them, traveling with them.
Yeah, and maybe that's a person who was looking for their lost loved one.
It could be. Yeah.
They also had
but
it
definitely is. Sorry,
medical
darling.
stations as well, didn't they? A lot
Correct.
of women were helping out,
Yeah.
especially locally.
Locally, everyone in that town was helping the wounded.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. It was a very good photograph, I've got to admit that. And people, you will be seeing that photograph. It'll be put on the sites and in the promo and just about everywhere.
I appreciate that. Irene, honestly, we could talk about Gettysburg for 4 hours. I mean, there's so much that happened to people I was with and to myself. And
what was the worst thing?
Worst?
The worst thing. Is anything that frightened you, really frightened you, besides the whooping?
Nothing really frightened me because I go into these things I try to go into any haunting situation with a positive attitude. And I tend to draw positive energy to myself. But there are people, for whatever reason, that draw negative energy to themselves. And so the scariest things for me is when I'm with someone who's on this weekend thing with me and who is paid to, kind of be there and go through all the things we're doing, and I have absolutely freak out. And didn't happen often, but there was a very...
We call them squealers over here.
Squealers, but they were affected in a negative way, and it could be because they could have been channeling a negative energy. Now, listen, you have to understand, and this is what people don't realize. For the most part, you know what you're getting when you go to Gettysburg because you're going to be dealing with soldiers, so you're going to be dealing with different emotions. Horror, fear, loneliness, isolation, just all the things that are associated with battle, right? Pain, suffering. I mean, that's all horrible. It's bad. Those are bad emotions. So if someone picks up on that in a major way, they're going to feel that. They're going to feel horror. They're going to feel sadness. I'll tell you, one time I was on the Triangular Field, and, again, I've been there several times. I try to stay objective because I'm there to help other people learn. Right, and I have my experiences, but I'm pretty good about that. Well, one time we were on the Triangular Field, and we were walking, and we got to this one area, and one of the intuitive women that was with us started picking up on some stuff. Well, all of a sudden, I go down on one knee and start crying. Yeah. I cannot explain to you why. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. I didn't smell anything. But I felt this overwhelming sense of sadness in this one part of the field. When you think about an 18-year-old soldier who's dying and calling out for his mother, because they all did, and you realize what kind of strong emotion that is. And if you pick up on it, you will be affected by it. Yeah. I know what you're talking about because when I was last in Amsterdam, I went to the Anne Frank Museum. That place really got me. Absolutely got me. 100%. You could feel it from the time you walked through the door and up the stairs.
Yeah, I've been there.
Wow. Wow.
Absolutely. It's great, it's a great house to look round, but the emotion is there. It's all there, everything.
Right. And I guess what we're trying to figure out, right, with all these things we do is we're trying to figure out what exactly is this? What's going on here? And it could be several explanations, but there's no doubt in my mind after all the research I've done and all the experiences I've had that hauntings are real. Yeah. And people are affected by them. What they are exactly, I would never say, because I just don't have enough information to make that determination. There's theories. There's pretty good theories.
I often wonder, is it something in us that tunes in and draws that emotion into us, or is it the actual dead person themselves, the ghost itself, that is putting that onto you? Some people say, oh, that it's the ghost that's putting that emotion onto you, but I'm not so sure. I think it's us. I really do think it's us. There's something in us that actually pulls that atmosphere, that emotion straight into ourselves.
Right. Because aren't we all connected? And we could talk about the Akashic records and how we're all connected and how
so they say, yeah.
We're all connected to everything that's ever happened. We already know about. We've already experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And being part is maybe it's part of the human condition where because we're human, this is what happens to us when we feel things. And the people who lived and died in the past are still a part of us somehow.
Yeah.
They're not totally gone. You know, whether it's a residual energy or a spirit energy or an object haunting or whatever it is, that this is what it is. And I just urge people to be open-minded about it. I urge them to read as much as they can and then go out there and experience it for yourself.
Well, there's nothing like experiencing it for yourself.
Nope.
That's true.
No, because if you don't experience it for yourself, it's just a story.
That's right. That's right.
I once took some people who are very skeptical about the paranormal up to a hill near where I live. And what you said earlier reminded me of that experience when you said it was almost as if everything changed, the atmosphere changed, the animals all went quiet, and you almost you became in a bubble. You know,
it's like stepping into time.
Yeah, it's like a time slip almost. It's like you're almost being transported through some very short time and space doorway into whatever world that is, whatever reality that is. And I think somebody I know who's been investigating these things for years has also said it's about frequencies, because all energy is a frequency.
Yep.
And people sometimes connect, they don't realize it, with each other because of they connect on a frequency level.
Right.
Now, why would it be any different for connecting with, say, energy from the past? There's still a frequency. There's still sort of a frequency of people. So if you can somehow connect with that frequency, a bit like tuning into a TV, like in the old days, and you used to have to try and find a channel. You know, there's something to be said for, I think, people triggering the connection, maybe unwittingly, maybe wittingly, I don't know, but something happens. There seems to be like a spark, like a trade-off between energies, and then it seems to trigger events. And then but to experience the event somehow, everything has to stop. Like time, space, reality. It's incredible. I can't really vocalize. It's happened to me once in a forest, and I was just standing there completely in awe of what I was experiencing. I know what I was experiencing was extremely odd and shouldn't really have been happening, really, in my view, because it was almost as if I was suspending my reality, or whatever was suspending my reality, and I was suddenly transported to almost like a different world, like a different universe. It was really strange.
Right.
But it's amazing if you ever experience it.
It is.
And I think that's amazing when you're able to connect with spiritual entities that try to interact with you, because they somehow seem to know that you are open to them, that you want to accept that they're there, because a lot of people go about their lives and they don't want to know. It's too scary. It's out of their comfort zone.
Right.
But for us, happy people who are open to this, I think it must be great for them as spirit entities, as people trapped in whatever.
And that was my next question, actually. You just triggered my next question. Did you have any of these, these apparitions or anything actually reacting with you?
Yes.
Interacting.
What you do is you get that a lot on EVP, electronic voice phenomena. So what you'll do is you'll have a tape recorder, and then you'll start it, and it could be digital, but and back when we were doing it for a while, we also used tape. Just a small little mini cassette recorders, because again, they each pick up little different things, different levels of different frequencies. So it's helpful to try to get the largest spectrum you can. So anyway, when we do these things, a lot of times we were in an area called, Spangler Spring. And it was an area where there was obviously fighting, and then when fighting stopped, the soldiers would come down and kind of share cigarettes with each other and then go back and kill each other. It's one of those weird things. It's one of those weird Civil War things. But we did some EVP experiments there, and we had one of the girls was sitting on one of the rocks, and I said, go over there and just start asking questions. And I know it's going to be a little awkward at first, but once you get used to it, just be thoughtful, be authentic, be kind, and be compassionate when you ask the questions. And so she went over there. She was on the rock, and I saw her, and I was watching everyone, and it was, pretty interesting. And she came back, and she played it for me, and she hadn't heard anything yet. She hadn't played it back. So she rewound it, and when she started asking pretty good questions, and she was just like, well, how do you feel right now? Like and which actually really good questions. Well, sometimes say, well, what's your name? Or you say, like, are you in the Union Army or Confederate Army? And they'll whatever say. And in this particular case, she's like, how do you feel right now? And this male voice comes on and says, cold.
Oh.
No.
And it's clear. Like, it's a pretty good quality EVP. There's only one word.
Yeah.
But cold. He was cold. And maybe at that point he's stuck, right? So they're stuck. Mm. And for one of the theories is it's a fragment of consciousness. So does consciousness survive death? Okay. So yes or no. And if it does survive death, is it a fragment of consciousness or is it full consciousness? So let's say someone dies in a very emotional, tragic, violent way, like as they did in this battle.
Yeah.
May a fragment of the consciousness be left over where they're caught in this cycle of activity where even though it's been 150 years, to them the battle's still going on. Mm. And in a lot of the EVPs, it feels like for them the battle's still going on. Because in one EVP that we didn't get this was a famous EVP that I found online once, and I looked into it. But someone asked a question or something, and then you hear a man's voice say, I knew George Pickett.
Oh.
Now, George Pickett.
No, that's quite good for an EVP because it's more than one word.
It's more than one word. And it was, George Pickett, it was Pickett's charge. And it's absolutely profound, but she and she was like, I can't believe I got that. And I'll tell you real quick. We were on Little Round Top, and Little Round Top is another famous part of the battle. The second day of the battle, the Confederates were really about to collapse the right side of the Union line, and Joshua Chamberlain and his men, from Maine, were the last line of defense. They had to hold that line. If they didn't hold the line, the battle was over. And the Confederacy may very well have won the war. So it was a pivotal moment. So what happened in the battle is they were out of ammunition because the Confederates kept charging in waves. They kept pushing them back, but they kept coming. And they had all these casualties at that point. They had no ammunition left. So Joshua Chamberlain said, fix bayonets. We're going to charge them. It was one of the seminal moments in all of U.S. history. They charged down this hill. And it shocked the Confederates. They were so surprised by this that they retreated. Then it gave the other Union forces time to back them up. So it was this big moment. So we always take people to Triangular Field. So one day we're at the Triangular Field, and we're walking, and it was, I think it was fall, but there were leaves on the ground, a lot of leaves on the ground. And you can actually see from where the Union lines were, looking down to where the Confederates were coming up and charging. Again, quite amazing that you can visualize it so easily. So we started to walk down the hill. I said, well, take some recorders, cameras, and let's just walk down the hill. So we start walking. Then we stopped, and then you'd hear shuffling behind us. Did it again, stopped, and would hear the rustling of leaves behind us. You can hear people running next to you, but you couldn't see them.
Wow.
Right.
And so we literally were up all night that night trying to figure out what that could be. And, one of the people we were with made a good point. She was like, well, what if they see us going down the hill and they're still stuck in the battle, and they start charging down a hill again because they think we're charging down the hill. And I'm like,
you were like a trigger to them to start them off again.
Trigger.
Wow.
Yep.
Amazing, isn't it?
It's
Absolutely
amazing.
But all the time you've been talking about this, like you say, you can actually see it in your head. I've been sitting there visualizing all these people running down the hill and the other ones, the fights, the bayonets, everything.
It's incredible.
It's been like watching a film in my head.
Well, what I highly recommend for people to do if they're going to go to Gettysburg, there's a great film that was made called Gettysburg. And it was a great movie. It was about 3.5 hours, almost 4-hour movie, but it was as accurate as anything could be.
Yeah.
And if you watch that movie, you'll see all the different areas. You'll see what happens at Little Round Top. You'll see Pickett's Charge, or these big scenes, Devil's Den.
I've seen it.
You'll see it all.
Have
you seen it, Christian?
Yeah, I've got it.
Oh, you've got it?
I've got the film, yeah. It stars...
All right, we'll round to your house then.
It's got Martin Sheen in it, Tom Berenger.
Yep. Tom Berenger.
God, there's...
what's it?
Jeff Daniels.
Yeah, who's out of Dumb and Dumber? I remember him.
Yeah, he plays Joshua Chamberlain.
That's right.
Not only is it an outstanding movie, if you don't want to read The Killer Angels or all these other great books about Gettysburg, just watch the movie and then get a feel for that, and then go, and when you go there, you'll be like, oh my God, it's so clear.
Was the movie actually made at Gettysburg?
In and around, mostly around. But here's another side note. A lot of the people and the extras who were in that movie had paranormal experiences.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
When they did Pickett's Charge, which is the big, epic final day when the Confederates charged the Union, the center of the Union line. It was like a last-ditch effort to break the line. They had it was called Pickett's Charge. Pickett was one of the generals involved with it. And they had to literally go a mile in this open field to get to the Union lines. And the whole time they had to do this, they were getting bombarded by artillery. And when people walk that, they get very emotional because they realize how futile it was for them to be doing this. It was a big mistake. It was Robert E. Lee's biggest mistake ever. He didn't make many, but this was a fatal mistake. It destroyed his army. But anyway, when the extras were when they were filming Pickett's Charge in the movie, there would be guys running, and then they would hear people next to them saying things who weren't there. And some of them were pushed. Some of them were really pushed pretty hard. And they heard voices, and it was this craziness and they were filming, but it was just and they would hear these things, see these things, and you can only imagine, it was almost exactly like they reenacted the battle to the fullest extent that they could reenact that battle scene. So it must have stirred up a ton of energy.
Wow.
Yeah, I should imagine it did. But, for them to be pushed in one thing or another, that begs the fact that these spirits, ghosts, or whatever can actually see these actors. Mm-hmm.
I believe that, and I think that there could be a physicality. People get pinched.
Yeah.
They get pushed, they get punched, they get slapped, this happens all the time in haunted houses or hauntings where people just what had just happened to me? Yeah. I was touched by something.
Yeah.
It must be difficult for them to do that, but with enough energy, they probably are capable of doing it.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Now, you wrote another book, and this we want to cover as well, because I want to cover both books today. Ghost Soldiers of Gettysburg People, and the other book is Unknown Down.
Yes.
Now, I don't know an awful lot about this event, so you'll have to go with this, and I'll just listen.
Okay. All right. I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version. So,
well, you've got plenty of time. Oh,
okay, great. After I had done the paranormal stuff for a while, and had written the Gettysburg book, and John and I, who you had on the show with me last time from J3 Films,
John Sumple. Yeah.
John Sumple. Him and I have known each other for 25 years, and he was kind of part of this whole going down the rabbit hole with paranormal activity. Mm-hmm. We've gone to New Orleans together. We've gone to many places together to shoot footage and do research. But what wound up happening is, so I did that for a long time. And then him and I were talking one day, and we're like, it's time we need to do a documentary, a real documentary. And I was like, well, what are we going to do it on? And we were talking about some of the haunted paranormal stuff, but there was so much of that on TV, as you well know.
Yeah.
That we were like, well, what can we do that's different? And I said, maybe we should do something on UFOs. Something real, but we have to find the right story. So that led us to starting the documentaries. We did the Stan Romanek thing. We met a lot of people. So now I went from the paranormal realm with ghosts into going down a rabbit hole with UFOs and ETs.
Yeah.
And it was the same process. I read every book I could possibly read. I'd already read some growing up because I was interested in it. But we had and it was the same process. So learning, growing, experiencing. I was at a conference when we had already filmed the Stan Romanek documentary, and I was at a conference in Sebring, Florida, with Stan and his wife, and we were just there for the conference. I was just hanging out with them, and I met a guy who was sitting at a table, and his name was Dennis, and he was this probably about in his 60s. And he had this little pamphlet in his hand, and it was called UFOs Over Miami. And literally this thing was like not much bigger than a matchbox. I mean, it was this small little yellow pamphlet, about 30 pages, and it just told the story of this experience that he and his cousin Bill had had. And I read this thing, and I went back to him the next day, and I'm like, this needs to be a bigger story. There's a real story here that needs to be a book. And he's like, well, talk to my cousin Bill. He did all the research, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, I met Bill Schroeder, talked to him, convinced him. I'm like, look, I won't charge you to write this. I just want to write it with you. You tell the story, I'll write it.
Yeah.
And he's like, and I did it because I was like, this story needs to be told. This is an incredible story that happened to you guys. And he's like, okay, so we decided to do it. The story is that Bill Schroeder and his cousin Dennis, they were both in the military. It was 1967. One of them was stationed in Miami. Dennis was stationed in Miami. Bill Schroeder was stationed in Key West. They were, now remember, 1963 was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
So it's 4 years removed. We are literally in the most intense part of the Cold War. And you have to remember, Cuba's right there. It's 90 miles from Key West. So everyone's watching each other very closely. So Bill and Dennis are actually on the phone chit-chatting, and they're both radar operators. So Bill is in his radar room. Dennis is in his. It was fairly late at night, and they're just chit-chatting about nothing in particular. All of a sudden, Dennis is like, I have to go. And Bill's like, what's going on? And he hung up, and he called back like 20 minutes later, and he was like, you're not going to believe what's going on here. And he tells him that they're tracking these bogies coming down the coast of the United States that actually started in Canada. It was from the almost like the Arctic Circle that these crafts started to come down all the way through Canada down.
So
the
they've been
coast.
picked up all the way down then?
And they were picked up by NORAD. So NORAD was picking them up out of Colorado, and then they started picking them up locally when they got closer to Miami. And then all of a sudden, things went crazy for Bill in Key West because they got close enough, so now they were on alert that these bogies were headed their way. Mm. So and what wound up happening is these bogies come down. They're going so fast, thousands of miles an hour. So, of course, they're thinking, well, it's not one of ours, and it's not one of the Russians. It can't be any of ours because they're going too fast, and they're doing things that we simply can't do. If there was a pilot in there, the pilot would be squashed to death. There was no way he'd be able to handle those kinds of maneuvers and the G-forces. So they knew there was something extraordinary going on. So what wound up happening is they got down to the Miami area, and they started to perform what Bill described as a grid search. They were searching for something off the coast of South Florida. And we scrambled some jets, and every time they got close, these things would just shoot up 20,000, 30,000 feet in the air. And again, we could never do anything like that. We just couldn't get close to them. So, the story gets more fascinating because what happened is they started going more south. So now they're towards Key West. At some point in time, Bill is in his radar room, and all of a sudden, everything goes dead, fried. All the equipment is fried. But what they didn't know at the time was, because they were following these things, what had happened is the Cubans saw them on radar. So now the Cubans...
They're tracking them too.
They scrambled 2 MiG jets. And the MiGs were like the Russian planes then.
Yeah.
2 pilots go out. They get close. They're trying to get close to this thing.
Sorry about that, Jack. Christian, are you moving around?
No.
No. Okay. Carry on, yeah. The MiGs try to get close to it.
So the MiGs try to get close to it, and what happened was one of the craft, UFOs, emitted an electromagnetic pulse. And the electromagnetic pulse literally fried all the equipment, not only in the Key West station, but also in the MiG. And when that happened, the MiG disintegrated.
Oh.
So the pilot died.
God.
So the other pilot went back, landed in Cuba, told his story. They kept it under wraps. Meanwhile, what happens with Dennis and Bill is that the cover-up starts right away.
Yeah.
The military is like, look, you
didn't see that? It didn't happen.
Right. It was a training exercise, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, they start getting transferred all over the world. So whoever saw that and experienced it, they were literally transferred away from each other as far as where they could be.
Yeah.
And this is kind of modus operandi. It's kind of an MO for what happens when military people experience something like this. All of a sudden they'll get transferred so they can't talk about it with each other. So there's this whole story, but that's just the beginning. So what happened over the course of the next 3 or 4 months is that there was this huge UFO flap over South Florida. All these reports of UFOs off the coast, in the Everglades, in Miami, in Hialeah, all over South Florida, reports of UFO sightings. And it culminated with this school in Miami where dozens of students and teachers actually saw a UFO land about 100 yards from the school.
That sounds very much like a story over here with a school that was in Wales where they saw a UFO hovering behind the trees, all the children in the playground.
Yeah,
just above the trees. It was hovering just above the trees, and the children reported it.
Very similar. And so the book is basically it's based on Bill Schroeder's story and Dennis's eyewitness accounts.
Yeah.
And what I did was in the book, I wanted to kind of beef it up a little bit. So I also included the flap. I included the Cuban part of it. I included everything that happened, as much research as we could find. And then I also brought in the element of the fact that these UFOs, what they did was they disabled the missiles at these bases.
Yeah.
I mean, they basically fried everything, and the missiles were inoperable. So during that time in the 60s, this was happening a lot all over the country where UFOs were showing up over these bases and disabling the missiles. So I actually interviewed a couple of other fairly well-known ex-military guys who came forward to talk about the fact that this happened to them at Minot Air Force Base, a couple other Air Force bases out west. So it's kind of the story of the Cold War, this event that if someone would have been trigger happy or if something would have went wrong, it could have caused World War III.
Yeah, I'll say.
And people don't realize how much was at stake, and all of a sudden they see these unidentified flying objects coming into their airspace when we're so hyper alert because it's the Cold War.
Now, the first sighting that Dennis saw was two triangle. Well, no, they're not triangle. Diamonds. Two sets of four UFOs. Was that right? In diamond formation.
Right, diamond formation.
Diamond formation. Or was it? I don't get it. Wait a minute. Was it 8 UFOs? 8.
Yeah, there were 2 sets of They all came down in like a formation, and then they started doing a grid search with like 4 each doing different grid searches. And then I think, I'm not sure if it was 2 or 4 kind of cut off from the rest and started to head way more towards Cuba. And that's when the Cubans were on high alert and they scrambled the MiGs.
Oh.
And of course, that the death of the soldier was covered up, and we couldn't find. There was this one guy in Cuba who may have been willing to talk, but it would have been really hard to find him and get him on camera or get him to even talk about it at all. But there's all these newspaper articles from back then about all these UFO sightings in South Florida.
Yeah.
So
sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
No, so you were saying that maybe they were looking for something. The UFOs were actually looking for something.
Yeah, Bill believes because on radar what he was seeing was this grid search. It was definitely a grid search. So that's why he was like, it's unknown down, right? There was an unknown craft that was down and they were looking for it. And he thinks they were looking for one of their own.
Yeah.
One of their one of their vehicles had crashed and they were looking for it. Now, whether they found it or not, we'll never know. But it was, and here's one of those things where if Bill hadn't come forward and Dennis hadn't corroborated, and he hadn't done all the research to find out what was happening in South Florida at the time with these other UFO sightings, no one would ever know about this story. And it's a quite amazing story. And I just felt it needed to be told.
Yeah, it is amazing. And when was the first time it hit the internet?
It was, I'm trying to think of, it really didn't hit. Bill hadn't done that much with this story because he had to wait until he was retired from the military and also retired as a detective.
So it really didn't hit the internet at all.
Because he was worried about his career, and all these guys are worried. They're told that if they come out, and it's really also a story about how these military guys have to keep these secrets to themselves, and how it has a negative effect on them.
Yeah.
And it's quite a lot to bear. It really is. It is. I mean. It's one of those things that it's just the more I got into it, the more I researched, the more I realized that, you know what, there's a lot to this. There's a lot more to this story than just the sighting. It's really what happened after the cover up, and the bigger picture of how these UFOs were showing up all over missile bases, all over the United States. And I guarantee you they were probably doing the same thing in Russia, in the Soviet Union. And we just don't know as much about that, obviously. And you've had it in England, guys. You've had it, the whole Rendlesham Forest thing. Yeah,
but there weren't the actual big missiles here at Rendlesham, were they?
Right.
I don't believe, no. But the point is they were monitoring that base, or could have been monitoring that base. Who knows?
Right.
That story has been so mixed up now. Absolutely one hell of a mix-up. Nobody really knows what happened now, what the truth of that is. You know?
Yeah, and no one, right, there's so much disinformation out there.
Yeah, it's been so buggered up.
And that's what happens, and it's hard. It's hard. But you know what the most compelling part of this story was my interviews with all the military. It was Robert Salas. Are you familiar with Robert Salas? He's the one who came out.
I've heard of him, yeah.
Yeah, I interviewed him, and he was the one who was at that military base out west who, again, the missiles were completely offline. These UFOs, whatever they did, they rendered them useless.
Yeah.
And it's a big deal to the military when they're fighting a nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union.
Yeah. And it's strange that it actually, at the very beginning of the Cold War, when this was all going on, how there were so many sightings over these military places.
There were. And I think there was, I think that what was happening, at least one of the things that could have been happening, is they were watching very carefully to make sure that no one slipped up. It was almost the message was, you're not destroying this planet.
Mm.
You know, and
it's like, in a way, it's like they're looking after us. So, you know, it would be nice to know that there are some friendly ones out there that are concerned about us.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. But they're looking out for us, but they're also looking out for themselves.
But
they don't want these nuclear weapons out in the solar system.
No.
Did you know that this has also got a connection to your last piece as well? Because we were talking about how ghosts, we think potentially they could have a frequency. Well, I've always been of the opinion that the reason that we have contact from other races from outside our planet is because they're tapping into a frequency. That frequency, if nuclear, it can stretch into space at an atom level better than any communication we'll ever send. Because there's a subspace particle that's launched into space at subatomic level that goes into space and projects like a beam of light, and it just attracts all sorts of potential life out there, I think. And I think the nuclear thing, if you think about it, there's been so much activity around nuclear bases around the world. Well, Cuba, for me, I mean, in the 60s, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis. What was all that about? It was about the Russians placing nuclear warheads pointing at the United States during a very sensitive political time in our world. And what a coincidence that it's nuclear. I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer. I think they were interested because we were starting to meddle in technology that perhaps we were not meant to meddle in. But
right,
I think basically they were attracted to see how the hamster and the wheel was getting on. You know,
right. Well, it's like kids playing with fire because to us we're infants. You know, so for us to be playing with nuclear weapons, like, yeah, no, that's not happening. You know, you guys cannot do this. I almost always feel like there's no way there could be. I always feel pretty good that there won't ever be a nuclear war because I almost feel like they won't allow it.
No, I don't think they'll allow it either.
Well, I hope they don't allow it, I tell you.
It's nearly happened so many times.
I lived through that stage in the 80s and or 70s, 80s,
God, the Cold War,
where they were telling you on the television, in case of a bomb going off, you put your mattress up against the wall, get behind your mattress.
Don't forget to get in the bunker so you can die a very slow death.
Scary. That's scary stuff.
What's the point of that? I mean, there was some crazy information being given out from the government at those times.
Oh my God!
How to preserve your life? Get loads of tins of beans, you'll be fine. What's crazy? What are you talking about? What was it in that film War Games? Do you remember that film War Games?
Yes.
And you had the professor who said, "Would you rather die in 5 seconds and wander sightless for 100 years?" Trying to find out where you are, and then you end up dying very slowly anyway, so what's the point? I mean, at the end of the day, tic-tac-toe, don't play a game you can't win.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
Very true. Very true.
And maybe that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to stop us from playing the game. You know, at the end of the day, you know,
I don't understand even why they have to have nuclear weapons. Let's face it. One country lets off a nuclear weapon against the other. That's the end of the lot of us.
Right.
Nobody's going to win this battle.
Right.
The only thing is it's deterrent, yeah. But what's the good of having a deterrent like that?
Right.
Because you've only got to get one loopy one on the other side, push his button, and that's it, isn't it?
Right. And there are a lot of those, leaders and dictators tend to be loopy.
Yeah, they gotta be loopy to run everything.
Right.
Luckily enough for us at the moment, we haven't got a leader at the moment, so we haven't got a prime minister. We're between idiots at the moment.
Between idiots.
Yeah.
But in that part of the world, in Miami, there's always been traditionally a massive sightings, isn't there, of UFOs, and there's always been a lot of interest down there.
Well, it's
something
the
about
Bermuda Triangle. Yeah, the Bermuda Triangle, one of the points of the triangle hits Miami.
Does it?
So, it goes from Miami to Bermuda, right. And it covers all of the Bahamas, all that area. It's all in the Bermuda Triangle. So there's this area of high strangeness down there with that. And that could literally be an underground UFO base. I say underwater. A lot of people have seen UFOs come up from the water, out of the water in those areas. And, and plus, it's always a very interesting area because of when you had the Cold War going on and you had with everything going on with Cuba, the CIA had a very large base, what you call base of operations in Miami. So there were a lot of what you would call spooks, spies. They say that the Kennedy assassination was hatched in Miami, the actual idea of it hatched in Miami, because there were Cuban nationals and these other fairly powerful people because the Bay of Pigs, when Kennedy kind of dropped the ball, and then all these Cuban, the nationals who were going to go in and free Cuba from Castro, they got left alone. They got left very vulnerably because Kennedy didn't supply the support that he was supposed to. So they were very mad at him. But you had the CIA, University of Miami, was actually a CIA headquarters there.
Wow.
And people don't know this. It was really an interesting place during the Cold War. So the fact that these UFOs came right down there to Miami, Key West, they had all these military installations, these missile bases, and here these UFOs toying with everyone. Literally toying with everyone. If you're in the military, you got to worry about that.
So Miami obviously is a hotspot for UFOs. Is there any other real hotspots like that where you get clusters of UFOs?
Yeah, we've had UFO flaps in this country. There in the 60s, there was and it was in the Midwest. In the 70s, in the Northeast, there was the Hudson River Valley had a UFO flap, and then in Maine and New Hampshire there was a UFO flap. Yeah. But I would say continuously go to the Southwest, including New Mexico and Nevada and the Southern California, the deserts out there, because it's so isolated in some of those areas of Nevada and New Mexico and Arizona and in the deserts of California. And we have a lot of military bases there, and we have a lot of underground facilities that people have no clue what's going on there. No one knows. So are they back engineering alien technology? And, so if that's happening, then are a lot of these things actually reverse engineered that are ours at this point? You have all those UFO crashes in New Mexico. New Mexico, we just drove through New Mexico, and everywhere we stopped in New Mexico was either a UFO incident, crash, several sightings, you name it. You name it.
Yeah?
Yep. Oh. What was the reason you called it Unknown Down? What was the thinking behind that?
It was really because of Bill. It was just an interesting.
Brilliant name, though, isn't it?
It's kind of a cool name, and it's all based on the fact that that was the reason they were there. There was an unknown down.
Yeah.
And with the military, they say it's an unknown. So it's an unknown down. And that's why they're there looking for that unknown down.
Okay.
So that was just one of the theories as to why they were there.
I had a conversation with somebody who worked for the FBI about 7 years ago online. And I just, because I was asking for something under the Freedom of Information Act, but because I'm not a US citizen, I couldn't get it. So anyway, but I just casually asked him, I said...
You didn't talk with an American accent then?
But he still go to my address, which unfortunately was British. So he'd have rumbled me. So anyway, I posed the question just before I went offline. I said, look, if the US government has a very high security rating for not talking about things that it classifies as not existing, how can you classify something that doesn't exist?
That's a great point.
How can you also have a higher security rating for something that you don't class as a defense issue? And I asked him both these very poignant
And I bet he thought, oh, bloody hell, it's an Englishman.
Right? And he actually couldn't answer the question. He said, well, first of all, as a country, we're looking to find the best way to keep information that's sensitive away from the public eye. And I said, okay, and I said, well, that's fine. I understand that. But answer me this. How can you classify something that you've always said didn't exist? How can you classify it as something that didn't? You see, why would you bother to classify something that doesn't exist?
Right.
So, and that's
put any
because
resources
you do
into that?
believe it exists. It's just you don't want us to believe or us to know that you think it exists. It's a
And
bit
I bet you really got him lost, didn't you? Because I'm lost now.
Well, it's a bit like when I've forgotten his name now, but who was ever head of the FBI, he said, there are known knowns that are unknown, and there are known knowns that are unknown to you, but there are known knowns which we know, which we don't want you to know. And by the time
you drink,
and if you listen to it, he goes on for 5 minutes, and by the end of it, you can't remember what the question was. But it's the whole point of it is it's disinformation. But why would you bother to disinform? That's my point. If you're trying to disinform, if you're trying to redirect, if you're trying to get me to look somewhere else, that's because there's something to find.
Right.
And that's always been my operandus, on this subject area, because they've tried so many different techniques, ranging from the original swamp gas to hot air balloons,
Chinese balloons.
Yeah, you name it. They've tried everyking, but
Chinese
it doesn't
lanterns.
wash because there's too many witnesses. There's too many people like Jack, who are going to find people out there who are going to be able to give eyewitness accounts of things they should not be seeing. And and as it won't go away, and if anything, it will never go away. And I think it's massively important that Mr. Roth and Sumple, have J-free films that investigate. And just as this program gives you a platform to talk about it, because we're reaching out to everyone and saying, well, look into this, because there is something to find. It isn't just an unknown. There is something there, tangible, something to connect to. And it's really important because it's the biggest question that faces the human race.
Right. Exactly. That's really well said, Christian, because it really is, because when you think about it, we appreciate the platform. We really do. And our goal in all of this, whether it's Go Soldiers of Gettysburg or, Unknown Down or our documentaries or whatever we're looking into when we're documenting this information is because we want to get that information out to the masses so they can do their own research and make up their own minds, but don't listen to anyone else. Do it yourself.
Absolutely.
Go out there and don't listen. If you don't want to listen to me, don't listen. You have to listen to me. I'm not trying to convince people either way. I base all of this, the way I write it is objectively, but from my own personal opinion is based on my experiences. And that's the way it is with every human being on the face of the earth. Their paradigm is based on their experience. So, it's a question of being open-minded, being compassionate to people who have had these. Look, when you're sitting there and you're interviewing ex-military guys who are 70 years old, and they're sitting in front of you and they're crying because they've kept this in for so long, and they felt so threatened. They felt like if they came out with it, they were going to be arrested, put in jail, worse. Their careers would be ruined. Their families were threatened. You see this over and over again. And when they finally reach a certain age that they're like, you know what, I don't care anymore.
Yeah.
The truth needs to come out. And that's when these brave, and they're military. They're ex-military. These guys are trained to observe what they were observing.
Yeah, they're patriots as well.
Absolutely. They were, a lot of them say, yeah, of course, look, national security is a real thing. So if you say we can't let this information out due to national security, they kind of agree with that. They're like, look, we can't put this information out because if the Russians get their hands on it or blah, 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 national security. And it is a national security issue. There's no question about it. UFOs are a national security issue.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't change the fact that you can't threaten human beings. You can't bully human beings. It's not right to keep information like that from other human beings who deserve to know the truth about. They always say, what are the three questions, the most important questions in life? Is there a God? What happens when we die? And are we alone in the universe?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the three, isn't it?
It is. And these are what these books are about. These are what the documentaries are about. Are we alone in the universe? Those soldiers at Gettysburg.
It'd be a miserable end to the world if it was.
Look,
Terrible.
you know what, guys, I got to be honest with you, and it's really good timing that I'm on the show today because we just got back from almost 2 weeks of filming for the third documentary that's going to be a part of this whole journey that we've been on with UFOs and ETs and abductions. And without giving away too much for the third one, some of the people we spoke to and interviewed were, just as I said, they're these ex-military people who were involved in programs directly related to ETs that are coming out and saying it was real. And when they're sitting there again and they're emotional and they start crying, these guys are tough guys. They're in the military. They're that old school, right? They don't mess around, right? And it's such a burden on them.
And it's a weight lifted off their shoulder to be able to speak about it.
Yeah. Exactly. So if you're going to ask my personal opinion, without question, not only do ETs exist, they've been here, the government knows about it, there are programs associated with not only the technology, but in telepathy and other things that have to do with it. Human beings have been abducted without question. There have been experiments that have to do with DNA and reproduction. It's all real. But that's my personal opinion. If I'm going to write a book or make a documentary, I'm going to just present that information to you. You have to go out for yourself and find the answers for yourself.
Yeah.
Well,
I agree with that, but I don't want to get myself abducted to find out.
You don't have to go that far.
Nobody's putting anything in me.
That's a good point.
No, Irene. Yeah, that is a good point because, that's true. And I agree with that completely. Sometimes I think about that. And I'm like, I definitely don't want to get abducted. It's a horrible experience for most people, But maybe seeing a couple of daylight discs up close, that are doing these amazing things, or whatever, just something. But and read good books. Read what these really smart people have been writing for the last 60 years.
Yeah.
Read Richard Dolan, read Bud Hopkins, read John Mack, Stanton Friedman. There's some dedicated, outstanding researchers and brilliant minds who studied this and wrote really good books that is full of great information.
Can I check another name in there?
Yeah.
Dr. Hynek.
Yeah.
The reason I use Dr. Hynek is because he was the main voice box for the United States disinformation campaign.
Correct.
To basically misdirect people. Now, this is, in many ways, for me, the proof that something was going on. Not sure what that was. It could have been just Cold War stuff, but I think there was more to it. And I think Dr. Hynek is total sort of mandate was to undermine every witness and just say, oh, we can find an answer. So what are the chances of having 100% earthly bound reason for everything? There's always going to be 5% you just don't know what it is. So it wasn't scientifically possible what he was trying to achieve with government backing until he changed his mind. And then all of a sudden he went against government line because for years he'd been told what to say and how to say it and how to misinform. Because back in those days, the world was a very different place. People would believe the government and their advocates. If a government official told you you're wrong, you'd probably say, okay, I probably am. But nowadays, we're much more skeptical, and it's probably a healthy thing we are. Because, the established governments of our world have a very bad track record of telling the truth, as we've now discovered. And so if they can lie about simplistic things, like, I don't know, figures for how many people are poor or whatever like that, then they're not going to tell the truth about extraterrestrial powers visiting this planet. It just isn't going to happen because they'll always say we're not ready for it. They'll always say, they'll cause panic. There's going to be a whole host of reasons why you wouldn't, as a government, tell people because you want to keep control. If you open Pandora's box, which is what that would be, governments would lose control overnight because for years they've been telling us that there's nothing there. And how do you then believe anything they say after that? And that's the problem they've got. They've now created lots of elephants in the room. People like me who are going, well, you've been lying then for years if you now tell me it's true, which means I'll never believe anything you say again. So they've got a problem now, the established governments of our world, because I believe one day they'll have to tell the truth. And I hope it's in my lifetime. It might not be. But
I don't want it in mine.
But I think it'll be an enlightenment. I don't think it'll necessarily be bad.
We talked to a lot of people in the last 2 weeks, and most of them said, we are disclosure. It's not going to come from the government. So we are the disclosure, literally. And we're the ones who need to just get the information and talk amongst each other and get the word out there. And that's what disclosure is. There's going to be a critical mass reached. And when that critical mass is reached, then the paradigm has to shift. And that's the kind of thing they talk about. Because you're right, the government has painted itself into a corner.
It certainly has. Well, we've got about 4 minutes left, Jack.
Oh, yeah.
So what's on the cards for now? Now you finished the documentaries, haven't you?
Well, we finished shooting the third one, but now we have to go into post, and post is that's going to be a good 6 months. That's where all the real hard work comes in. So we're going to finish that, and then we're already talking about some other ones, possibilities for the next one. So we're just going to keep going. We're going to keep plugging away with these documentaries. We're lucky. We're fortunate that we have distribution, and we have a distribution partner that's there for us, and that's a big part of the battle in getting films made. So we're just going to keep creating quality work and doing the best job we can of creating compelling and educational stories. And trying to get people to ask their own questions, and we're gonna start. We used to do a little podcast. We're gonna start that again. Try to get some guests on to talk to about specific things. Yeah. And we're just gonna keep doing what we're doing. I'm gonna eventually write another book. We've been so busy with the documentaries, I haven't had time to really think about that, but. This is I'm on purpose, guys. This is what I was meant to do. And I'm glad I feel good about it because I feel like I'm on purpose and this was what I was meant to do. So, and I can't thank you guys enough for having us on and then having me on to talk about ghosts. I really appreciate that. I really do.
Well, we love a bit of ghosty.
Yeah. There's a lot more there. I mean, there's stuff. I mean, boy, I'll tell you. But yeah, it's a fascinating topic as well.
Yeah, it is a fascinating topic. So, what would your next book be about? Do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I always wanted to write a book about my whole journey, 20-year journey with ghosts and how with the things I've experienced. Because Gettysburg is only a small part of it. So I was thinking about that, but I think right now I'm going to stick with the UFO and ET phenomena. Yeah. And there's a couple of really good stories out there that I might team up with someone else again to write a really compelling book about this. But there's a lot on the table right now, so I can't. There's nothing definitive, but I am thinking about it.
Okay. Right, so we're down to 2 minutes now, and where can they buy your books? Now, I know one place they can buy your books, amazon.co.uk.
Yes, they absolutely can.
Unknown Down and Ghost Soldiers of Gettysburg by Jack Roth. I hope everyone's written that down because I've written it down, and I'm going to buy those books. So where else can they get them, Jack?
Well, they're going to be available eventually on the J3 Film site. They can go directly there as well. And then, it's just going to link to Amazon, basically. Mm-hmm. And in the United States, I don't know about the UK, but in the United States, there's Ghost Soldiers of Gettysburg is at Barnes & Noble's.
Oh, yeah.
Because that was...
That's like Waterstones, is it?
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, my books are there as well.
Yeah, right.
Which
so
I can't remember the bloody name of them.
but I read. What's the easiest way to get a book these days? Amazon, right?
Yeah, Amazon. That's where I go every time.
Yeah.
If I'm going to buy a book, I buy it from Amazon. You roughly know what you're getting anyway, and it's delivered the next day. It saves you going out and looking through these hundreds of books in the bookshops.
Yes.
Right, so that's it, folks. And Jack, thanks for coming on, and we hope to see you again. And we will be seeing you again. Please don't forget, I've got you booked in just before the release of the show, the release of the documentary.
John and I will be coming on. It's great.
Yeah, and I'll be screaming at you if you don't.
No, absolutely. We already have it on our calendars, and we're looking forward to it. It's always a lot of fun to talk to you guys. You guys are great. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
right. Thanks for coming on, Jack, and thanks again, Christian, for another
brilliant
show. Pleasure. All right. And everybody, we can be found everywhere. All right. Bye.